our home state, California. Your home state, your native state, my home state now. The resource curse. I'm just going to quote from Wikipedia. Here's the resource curse. The resource curse is the phenomenon of countries with an abundance of natural resources, such as fossil fuels, having less economic growth, less democracy, or worse development outcomes than countries with fewer resources. Close quote. You spoke recently at the National Conservatism Conference in Miami, I think, about the resource curse in California. Explain that.
Well, if we say that tech is the oil of the 21st century, there is this strange juxtaposition where California has been, it has these gusher-like companies that just generate, enormous wealth, enormous profits, a decent number of quite well-paying jobs, and then they're combined with this, rather bad form of social political governance, where you'd never do anything like this. And it's that juxtaposition I was trying to make sense of. There's like a San Francisco version of it where it's, on a per capita GDP, it has to be one of the wealthiest cities in the world, and then it's completely misgoverned. And somehow these things are, it's not a paradox, but these things are actually deeply connected.
So you made the point.
But the one thing I would quibble with on the definition is California is not poor. It's still
fantastically rich.
It's 40 million people in California. It's 82 million in Germany, 125 million in Japan. Today, the California GDP is roughly the same as Germany or Japan. The average person in California makes twice as much money as the average person in Germany, 3 times as much as the average person in Japan. So there's something about it that's worked quite well from a macroeconomic point of view, and then it's worked catastrophically from a governance point of view. We have public schools that don't work, all these sort of government worker rackets.
You mentioned you mentioned a couple of, it's worked quite well. It's worked historically well. There's never been any massive creation of wealth for so much wealth in so short a time, as far as I.
Well, if we evaluate it by GDP, it's still working quite well.
Yes.
If we evaluate it by the quality of government, it's quite screwed up. The resource curse analogy I used is, if we compare it to oil countries, it's not the worst, it's not the best, it's not as good as Norway, it's not as bad as Equatorial Guinea. I think you should think of it as roughly on par with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a crazy Wahhabi ideology. California has a woke ideology. Wahhabism to Saudi Arabia is roughly like wokeism to California.
You mentioned that one aspect of the misgovernance is inflated real estate values. Explain how that works.
You have to think of it as, the curse of an oil state or a tech state as you have this enormous gusher of wealth, and then it gets redistributed very inefficiently. And one inefficient vehicle is towards overpaid government workers. The average California government worker gets paid twice as much as the average private sector worker in California. It's by far the highest ratio in the US. Texas, Florida, the average government worker gets paid 10, 15% more than the average private sector worker. In California, it's twice as much, including the very generous retirement benefits they get. Right. And then the second way that the tech wealth gets very inefficiently redistributed is through all these sort of crazy zoning laws where, if you're living in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, you're not in the tech industry, but you're a landlord who bought some apartment, and you make sure the zoning laws never get changed, nothing new ever gets built, and enormous amount gets shifted into the sort of very quasi-governmental real estate sector.
Overall, the cost of living in California is some 40% higher than in the rest of the nation, and the cost of real estate is 100% higher. What does that mean? Once again, I'm quoting you. Basically, you have to replace the middle class, meaning they just move out.
Sure. There was, I believe it was Carol Quigley, the Georgetown historian, who circa 1960 said that the Republicans are the party of the middle class, the Democrats are the party of everybody else. And probably the most middle class constituency left in California are government workers. And if you think of teachers or people like that as not natural Republican voters, if that's the microeconomic or political economy of California is something like that, it's no wonder that it's a D+30 state. It's not, it shouldn't be surprising at all.
Right. So this brings us to politics. You argue that the Golden State poses a problem for each of the two parties, Democrats and Republicans. Democrats first, quoting you. On the Democratic side, my read is that the Democrats have no alternative but to somehow pretend they can make the California model work for the country as a whole, but it won't.
It's just like, if you were to say, I don't know, I'll go back to the Saudi Arabia analogy. If you were to say the
as a
Wahhabism in
Californian,
Saudi
that one hurts me,
Arabia
but go ahead.
is the key to solving all the problems throughout the Islamic world, they just need to be like Saudi Arabia. That's preposterous because it's not the Wahhabi ideology, it's the oil money.
Right.
And in a similar way, if California, if it's somebody like, I don't know, Newsom or Kamala Harris saying that it's some hyper woke identity politics, political correctness to the nth degree, that's not what makes California successful. It's the big tech companies.